The castle of Brunnenberg stands not very far from the Brenner Pass, and it was here on his release last year that Ezra Pound returned to Italy, the country where he has lived for most of his life. Pound is not merely one of the greatest living poets, he is also an explosive, almost legendary figure, a man who has been variously described as a prophet, a mystic, a fascist, an eccentric, and a genius.
Heaven's worry scurries to earth, twisty planning, what's to block it? At sight of a good plan, they turn to rotten again. The sight of their planning gives me a pain. First say yes, then say no, good plan, no go. But a rotten they dress in flummery. The sight of their planning worries me. Our active designers don't like old ways, irked by the solid, symmetrical.
Pound's son-in-law is an Italian prince, Boris de Rachevils. His daughter is Princess Mary de Rachevils. He has 2 grandchildren, and his English wife, Dorothy Pound.
State all a wobble, scanners and boobs, a few left to gobble. Bright boys and planners, some who'll take trouble, all of a bubble down into quicksand. No tool against tiger, no boat for river, that much, no more than they know it. But above all, to be precise, at the Gulf's edge or on thin ice.
Above all, to be precise. Pound's family comes from New England. They're related on his mother's side to the Longfellows, and the family coat of arms is described in Longfellow's Tales of a Wayside Inn. 4 generations of his family on the father's side. His own father, Pound as a baby, and his grandfather. As a man, he settled in Europe, becoming during the 20s one of the leading figures of the avant-garde in the post-war literary Paris. Jean Cocteau belonged to the same remarkable group before he became a member of the French Academy. So did Ford Madox Ford the novelist, James Joyce, whose Ulysses Pound helped to get published, and Pound himself, poet and self-styled specialist in genius. Another great name in the same circle was Wyndham Lewis, an author and painter no less explosive and disturbing than Pound himself. This portrait of Pound is the earliest portrait that Wyndham Lewis painted. In its sharp, incisive line, Pound could find a counterpart to what he was trying to do in his own poetry. He was to find it still more, perhaps, in the work of the sculptor Gaudier-Bajewska, who was killed in the First World War at the age of 24. This is Gaudier's well-known sketch of Pound.
Gaudier was the most absolute case of genius I've ever run into, and they killed off an awful lot of sculpture when they shot him. You've got to consider that all this sculpture was made during 3 years. If Sophie Suzanne hadn't got him out of France, smuggled him over to England, he'd have been doing his military service, the preparation for military service, and he never would have done anything. Then he went back and was killed at Neuville-Saint-Vaast, which is the kind of wastage you get in a war. That war was, I think, justified on the part of England.
Pound's interest in Gaudier did not stop at simple admiration. he did all that he could to promote the recognition of Gaudier's genius. No man has fought more vigorously or devoted more years and tons of correspondence to fighting other people's battles once he believed in them.
Gaudier was going to do a portrait in plaster, which I loathed, and I said, for God's sake, do it in stone. I'll get you the stone. So it cost 3 quid or 3 guineas to get him a lump of stone. That was the only full-sized lump of marble he ever had. Well, first they put it under a shadowing and symbolical pine tree, but I didn't want the sap to fall on it, so they put it properly facing the east like the Sphinx. But that left one in the garden with nothing but the back of it. And then I remembered the old Greek story that Fontenelle has dug up of the man who got elected king because he saw the sunrise before the general mass of the people. His slave put him up to it. He saw the sunrise hitting the mountains in the west. Yes, that is the direction the statue now faces. And that's where the first gleam shows.
Pound's obsession with strict economy of expression turned his attention to the Chinese written character. He believes that the Chinese character, the ideogram, is a poetic image in itself, an image with its own peculiar logic.
It is the kind of intelligence that enables a cherry stone to make cherries and also to refuse to do anything else.
It is one of Pound's theories that the Chinese written character provides a true and logical picture of what in fact it says.
Well, I get it that I'm no calligrapher and I never use a brush. You have primitive sun, then when they want to make it pretty, they square it up. And that's the sun. Then for the dawn, you've got the sun over the horizon. And you have tree. And to get the east, you have the tree with the sun in its branches, the way you'd see the sun coming up. And later in the day, when the sun is higher, you've got him there sitting on the very top of the tree.
This theory of Chinese writing is not accepted by most Chinese scholars, not that that bothers Pound. His interest in the language has led him to translate many of the Chinese classics, most notably the works of Confucius.
Men of old, wanting to clarify and diffuse throughout the empire that light which comes from looking straight into the heart and then acting, first set up good government in their own states. Wanting good government in their states, they first established order in their own families. Wanting order in the home, they first disciplined themselves. Desiring self-discipline, they rectified their own hearts. And wanting to rectify their hearts, they sought precise verbal definitions of their inarticulate thoughts, that is, the tones given off by the heart.
The Confucian maxim, "Make it new," is embroidered on Pound's own yellow scarf and has become his watchword. For in contrast to Confucianism, he says, what has Christianity to offer but the one command, "Thou shalt attend to thy neighbour's business before thou attendest to thine own"? Confucian thought has become a part of most that Pound has written, either in poetry or prose. Like Confucius, he has his own obsession with teaching, the spread of useful and vital knowledge, and a hatred of all that he regards as unimportant or second-rate. Just as Confucius preserved only the best among the books written before his time and had the rest destroyed, so Pound would happily do likewise. The second-rate should be eliminated. For after all, how many books are worth preserving? How many books does a man really need to know?
You can have no literature without curiosity. And at that point, the most of the celebrated writers of my generation have simply withered away. Got universities full of gadgets. They provide the young with no tools. There's a place called St. John's. They give them 100 books, none of them to teach the young fellows anything in particular. I only know one effort to provide an education, and that is available in 6 little gray books: Benton, Delmar, Agassiz, Confucius, Spinoza. There's one little series of books which are sold for $1 in the United States that would be useful for a man, and nobody ought to be allowed into Congress, nobody ought to be allowed to vote until they know at least what's in them.
Fenollosa, Benton, Delmar and the rest would certainly not occur to most people as the world's key writers. Characteristic of Pound was the vigour with which he has backed and spread their ideas throughout the world, in his own books and in his vast international correspondence. But what we can accept is Pound's own thinking on the subject of poetry.
Don't imagine that the art of poetry is any simpler than the art of music, or that you can please the expert before you have spent at least as much effort on the art of verse as the average piano teacher spends on the art of music.
Poetry is the medium that Pound has chosen for expressing his belief that any society based upon banks and banking, financial monopolies and the stock exchange is doomed because it is rotten at the centre. All these things, according to Pound, are so much usury. The whole great flood of the cantos drives that one idea. You will get no real creative effort, he says, in a world that is hamstrung by financial monopolies with usury, or, as he says in the most famous canto of them all, with usura.
With usura hath no man a house of good stone, each block cut smooth and well-fitting, that design might cover their face. With usura hath no man a painted paradise on his church wall.
For Pound, usury is not creative effort. It is a blunting of the sharp edge, a blurring of the outline, a confusion of the image, and all art.
With usura the line grows thick. With usura is no clear demarcation, and no man can find site for his dwelling. Stone cutter is kept from his stone, weaver is kept from his loom. With usura, wool comes not to market.
The journey on which Pound set out with the cantos has already taken him 40 years of thinking, writing, and controversial living. 100 of the cantos are written. The journey is drawing to a close.